to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. Here it is Wednesday, April 22nd, 2015, middle of the week, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday, and another hopefully relaxing weekend. Before we get into the news here, I'm looking on the Fox News feed. France has announced they've just thwarted a terror plot against a church by this mean old Islamic person against this poor, helpless, defenseless Christian church. And they made a point of replaying the video from the Charlie Hebdo false flag. And what was interesting, we all know that there's part of that Charlie Hebdo video where the terrorist, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, fires at a police officer on the ground and misses him, and the police officer starts playing dead. Well, in the copy of the video they just showed, the police officer is and the area around him is completely blurred out. They don't want that little embarrassment to be calling attention to itself any longer. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, keeping an eye on us, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, the White House has issued a statement saying the job is not done in Yemen. Those gosh darn Yemeni people still think they should run their own country with their own elected government, and that cannot be allowed to stand. Right now, the body count from the U.S. and Saudi effort to slap the Yemenis upside of the head and make them see reason about accepting a U.S. puppet is almost 1,000, coming up on 1,000, which I think that would be enough. But obviously, the administration feels differently. And if the White House is really saying the job is not yet done in Yemen, then Barry, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA torture centers. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we're going to call Yemen and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. Rest of us, we're going to sit this one out. Yesterday, Saudi Arabia declared the end of the airstrikes. And then after enough of an interval where people started coming out to clean up the debris, they launched a second series of airstrikes. Now, as Yemen gets clobbered, we're seeing this article over here saying, what is it that Riyadh is trying to achieve here? You know, Washington's obviously part of this, but nobody seems able to explain it. Well, there is an explanation. They just don't want you to know what that is. The explanation is simple. It cannot be made public. Back in 2012, the U.S. intervened in Yemen, drove out the legitimate government of President Saleh, and imposed a U.S. puppet ruler, Hadi, on the people of Yemen. Here we are, all these years later, the people of Yemen don't like having their nation ruled by a government that serves a foreign nation, and are trying to kick Hadi out and bring Saleh back. So the United States, using Saudi Arabia as a proxy to hide from the American people that this is another U.S. war of conquest, is having to go back into Yemen to bomb and starve those people until they remember, like the provinces of ancient Rome, once conquered, you're expected to remain conquered. How dare you disagree with us? Ditto Iraq, ditto Libya, ditto Ukraine, ditto Iran. Now, these leaders of nations would gladly kill each other over who gets to rule what region, but they can always be counted on to unite against any people that dares think they should rule their own country, and that's exactly what's going on in Iraq, in Libya, in Yemen right now. We're going to grab a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, is Olan's Paul slipping?
I'm sorry?
Is Hollande from France, Paul, slipping a little?
Yeah, probably, because, we've got terrorists and, keep everybody afraid. But so far, the reaction I'm seeing to this is basically ho-hum. And because so many of these Islamist terror plots in the U.S. have turned out to have been manufactured by the government, I think the people of France are probably smart enough to realize this is just more of the same.
Yeah, on Yemen, I mean, pretty much the whole Saudi army is aren't they pretty much all mercenaries?
Yeah, and what's really amazing is a large number of them are from Yemen, which is going to make a ground incursion seem rather silly.
Well, Eric Price, he was the founder of Blackwater. Isn't he living now in Saudi Arabia, I believe?
He bops all over the place here, and I imagine by now he's probably got several international arrest warrants out for him. So he's one of those often the ether, movers and shakers and mercenary commanders who has to stay mobile.
You can see that they're losing control. All the empires, outer, it's falling apart.
It's exactly mirrors the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. They got overextended. They didn't have a military that could actually police all of the provinces, especially after they lost those 3 legions in Germany, and it just began to fragment, and that's what's going on here. I don't think anybody back at the Project for the New American Century ever conceived of the possibility that they were going to have to re-invade these targets multiple times. They just figured they had that list that Wesley Clark blew the whistle on, and they figured, well, we'll go into Iraq, throw out their government, put a friendly government in. That will close that book. Then we'll go on over to Syria and replace their government. That'll close that book. Then we'll do it to Libya and close that book, and then we'll do it to Yemen and close that book. But the books are refusing to stay closed. And that's why the U.S. is having to invade Iraq a 3rd time under the pretense of fighting ISIS. Same thing with Libya. They're having to go back in there a 2nd time. They're going back into Yemen a 2nd time. These conquered provinces refuse to stay conquered. And that is really, really a problem. And, of course, the end goal is to basically reconquer Iran and get revenge for Iran's kicking out the U.S. puppet back in 1979.
Iran's a big country, though.
Iran's a big country, and they're very cozy with Russia right now. And I'm sure there's a huge amount of denial going on in Washington, D.C., where they're sitting back and saying, oh, this'll never go nuclear. We'll prevail in a conventional arms. But from where I look at this whole situation, the U.S. is bogged down in Iraq. They're bogged down in Libya. They're going to get bogged down in Yemen. And they are militarily exhausted, economically exhausted. The U.S. does not have the manufacturing or manpower to prevail in a conventional war against either Russia or China, or worst case, both. And we're seeing more. We're seeing more and more top military commanders and experts start to go public with their concern that if this thing spins out of control, it's going to wind up nuclear.
Except that crazy Rasmussen from NATO. That guy's nuts.
Yeah, he's out there screaming, we've got to destroy Russia for democracy. Well, how about if we get democracy back over here in the West before we start claiming to export it to any place else? Because with all the massive election fraud going on in this country, it is clear we are no longer a republic. We no longer have democracy. We have a fascist economic dictatorship manufacturing the illusion of fair and honest elections to stay in power.
Yeah, we got an oligarchy. People need to realize. I mean, did you see the video with the cop taking the woman's cell phone? The guy looked like a mercenary.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's behaving like one. And I want to go back to that story yesterday where these cops unloaded on this unarmed teenager, shot him 16 times, and their police chief is justifying it, saying this is what they're trained to do. Just go on out and kill anybody that they think might be a problem. And this kid did not have a gun. He didn't do anything to justify being arrested, let alone sentenced to death on the spot by this jury of police officers.
That's the problem. You got good cops, but they're all in the buddy system, you know.
Yeah. That's an important point.
That makes them not the good cop. Then, if people say there's good cops, but they cover up for the bad cops, then they're not good cops.
I would agree with you, but there's a mid-ground in there I think we need to acknowledge, okay? There are a lot of good police officers out there who aren't actively involved in covering up, but they stay silent out of loyalty to their uniform and badge, and that's also a bit of a problem. But I know from conversations I have with people I know who are in the local police department, they're not happy about what's going on. They're not happy about their new public image. They're very angry with both the police command structure and the government, which seems to encourage this behavior. And, you know, if they weren't working toward their pension, a lot of them would have resigned by now. Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Dustin, we got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Got another caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So, Yemen's ex-president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, the elected leader of Yemen who was removed from power by the United States back in 2012 in what Barack Obama, up until only a few weeks ago, held aloft as a shining example of American intervention in other countries to bring them the American way of life. And, of course, now the bombs are falling out of the sky because Saleh wants his job back. The people of Yemen want Saleh back. Most of the military want Saleh back. It's only the installed puppet dictator Hadi, who's not even in Yemen anymore, he's hiding out in Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. who want the puppet ruler restored. That's what this conflict is all about. Same with Iraq, same with Libya. Once you're conquered, you stay conquered by the American empire. All righty. By the way, over in Saudi Arabia, one of the Saudi princes has promised a free Bentley to every Saudi pilot in the Yemen airstrikes that kills 1,000 people or more. All right, we're going to take a couple more phone calls here. Jerry in New Jersey, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Hey, man, you have a good show, dude.
Thank you.
Very good show. Hey, man, just an idea for what it's worth. I don't know, well, maybe you can, make a comment about it or whatever. But regarding police abuse, people need definitely record the police using video cameras, but also contact a lawyer like ahead of time. Have a lawyer lined up already.
Well, that's a little impractical because most of these police abuse cases, the citizen doesn't know they're about to happen. But you are absolutely correct about everybody having those cameras handy, because the reason this story about the officer just grabbing this woman's camera and smashing it on the ground became an issue is because there was a second camera in operation that caught it. Now, the government has spent a huge, vast amount of your tax dollars to put their TV cameras all over the place to make sure there's constant video coverage of you. We need to use our cell phones and digital cameras to do exactly the same thing back to the representatives of the government. There shouldn't be just one camcorder or one cell phone or one digital camera on a police interaction. There should be 12. There should be 24, so that when the officers try and grab the cameras and destroy them, we have the video to make the story go further. Because remember, the courts continue to rule that the police force has no expectation of privacy when they are out in public doing what they are supposed to be doing on the taxpayer dollar. Okay? Exactly. There is no law that's, the Supreme Court has said videotaping the police in the performance of their duty is protected by the First Amendment.
But seriously, would it be a good idea to have people get a lawyer ahead of time?
Ahead of time of what? They don't know when these things are going to happen. It's like the kid in South Carolina. He's pulled over for a traffic stop, and all of a sudden he winds up shot in the back 8 times. How does he know ahead of time that he needs to call a lawyer? Now, that being said, I think anybody who's getting ready to go to a scheduled demonstration or protest ought to familiarize themselves with the laws currently in effect. But remember, behind all of that is the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And the United States Supreme Court ruled in Marbury versus Madison, laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. So even if the police come out and say, we've passed a new law that says you have to rub blue mud into your navel, you could say the law is null and void. I don't have to obey it, and you are wrong to enforce it.
Well, yeah. Hey, I like you, Mike, and good ideas, but I'm just basically people do need to organize, though. That's the main thing. Well,
obviously some organization is valid, but what is making this movement so powerful is that it is a leaderless resistance. Once you organize and you have leaders people are going to, those leaders become target for either corruption, compromise, or outright elimination. What the federal government cannot deal with is 200-odd million Americans all acting on their own. They have no way to deal with that.
Hey, Mike, keep up the good fight, dude. Keep up the good fight.
All right, thank you very much here. We're going to switch over to Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I don't know, Mike. That previous caller might be onto something. He could have lawyers marketing rapid response retainer programs, like they do for gun rights and stuff. You could have lawyers chasing police cars instead of ambulances.
I like that image of the lawyers chasing those police cars around and getting ready to file these gigantic civil suits based on police brutality. I think that's a good idea. Where this falls apart, of course, is that no American on the street expects they're going to be confronted by a police officer, with a murderous rage going on inside them or brain melted on antidepressants. Right. And so there is no practical way to have a lawyer ahead of time of a confrontation if you're not doing anything that justifies the confrontation. I mean, these police brutality incidents, it's like being struck by lightning. or getting hit with an earthquake. You don't know ahead of time it's going to happen.
Well, it's like these concealed carry legal retainer programs. They are marketed en masse, and it's like a group benefit type. It's like a group thing. People actually buy into a service, a retainer service for a legal firm in the event that they do have to use their concealed carry.
Now that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. But in the context of these almost
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, it's statistically very unreal. What I called about was 2 quick items from the SRN news report at the top of the hour. In the too hypocritical to be believed department, we have European countries complaining about Gazprom practicing non-competitive business practices. I thought, oh my God, you got to be kidding me! With all that's going on with Ukraine and sanctions against Russia and stuff like that, they're grousing that Gazprom is somehow cheating Europeans.
That anti-monopoly lawsuit was filed at the same time Russia started talking with Greece about a new pipeline to go around Ukraine to the south so that Kiev can no longer steal natural gas flowing to Europe for its own needs, because the outstanding issue is the fact that Kiev owes Gazprom billions and billions of euros or rubles or dollars or whatever they're denominating it in. And so this attack on Gazprom is in retaliation for attempting to bypass Ukraine. Because what the EU wants, what Ukraine wants, is for Russia to go on giving free gas and oil to Kiev to support its war machine against the eastern Ukraine.
So they turn around and allege that they're overcharging. One last thing real quick. I have the solution for the NFL concussions lawsuit problem.
Yeah.
It's called soccer.
I like that.
All right. Take care, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to be taking a break for commercials here real soon. I know I've got another caller, but I'm going to have to hold you over the commercial break. But as far as Gazprom charging too much, I mean, that's up to Gazprom to decide the prices, and Gazprom's prices are being driven down by Saudi Arabia's oil price war like anybody else. And if Europe thinks that Gazprom is a monopoly, go ahead and develop a parallel system or infrastructure. This is just Europe wanting to badmouth the Russians for no reason whatsoever, because Russia's refusing to do what all these policy experts predicted it would do. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, FARS News is reporting, and this is something we ourselves commented on not too long ago. This U.S. reinvasion of Yemen using Saudi Arabia as a proxy is all about bringing Yemen back under the control of their appointed U.S. puppet ruler, Hadi. It's being sold to you that the U.S. has to go after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But FARS News is out there saying basically these organizations weren't even in Yemen at the start of the campaign. They're being brought in from other locations by Israel. And they're saying Mossad has brought in ISIS, Boko Haram, and Al-Shabaab terrorists to Yemen. This is a statement by Amir Abdollahian, and this is the Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister, saying the evidence and intelligence gathered over the past 2 months is showing that the movement of ISIS and these other groups is being coordinated by national intelligence agencies. And he makes a point that we have made ourselves. Have you noticed that these supposed Islamic militant fanatics never actually attack Israel's interests anywhere in the region? They'll go after the Christians, they'll go after Americans, they'll do all these wonderfully staged, faked videos for Rita Katz to wag at you. And remember, it wasn't all that long ago that it was documented Israel was giving arms and supplies to ISIS in Syria. It's a made-up enemy, just like Emmanuel Goldstein out of George Orwell's 1984. The government needs an enemy to trick you into war and sacrifice, and that's exactly what ISIS is. Because we all figured out Al-Qaeda was a fake. So this is Al-Qaeda version 2, and they rebranded it as it was. Now then, I repeated my experiment today that I did yesterday. I went out to Google, and I used their image search for Iranian convoy. And I got nothing but pictures of the United States warships in the region, the Theodore Roosevelt and its auxiliaries. Now, our corporate media continues to describe the Iranian convoy as warships, intending to deliver weapons to those gosh darn rebels in Yemen. Now, warships are not designed to carry a lot of cargo past what they need for themselves to operate. So already this story is suspect. The corporate media has yet to show us this supposed convoy of Iranian warships. And as my little search proves, even a Google image search only returns photos of the U.S. warships. So at this point, it's beginning to look more and more like this Iranian convoy are actually cargo ships carrying humanitarian aid for the people of Yemen, who are starving under the U.S.-Saudi blockade. And even USA Today acknowledges this is probably what's going on. Now, today the corporate media is reporting that the Roosevelt and its auxiliaries are shadowing the Iranian convoy. Still no pictures of it. Iran, so far, has not done anything actionable. They could get up to Yemen, and the Saudis and the U.S. could say, we don't care if it's food and water and medical supplies, you turn around and go home, which is going to make the U.S. look really bad. The wild card we need to be aware of, as always, is Israel. Now, it's been documented that they have been sailing those Germany-supplied Dolphin-class submarines down through the Suez Canal and into the Gulf area. One of those submarines could be sitting submerged and silent ahead of where the Iranian convoy is coming, because the Iranian convoy isn't zigzagging. They're just following a straight, predictable course because it's humanitarian aid. And we know what Israel does to ships carrying humanitarian aid. They have a past history of attacking them in international waters. So, hypothetically, Israel, submarine sitting close to the ocean floor, waits for the Iranian ships to get overhead, and then flips off a torpedo at one of the U.S. ships off to the side. Oh, my goodness, Iran has attacked the USS Maine and sunk it. We have to go to war against whoever it is we're supposed to go to war against. And we know that Israel has carried out such deceptions, trying to trick the U.S. into war before. Viktor Ostrovsky, a former Mossad agent, in his book By Way of Deception, detailed how Israel smuggled a radio transmitter into Tripoli and sent out fake messages on frequencies they knew the U.S. was listening to, using codes they knew the U.S. had broken to make it look like Gaddafi was getting ready to launch massive terror attacks across the world, and that tricked Ronald Reagan into bombing Libya, trying to bomb Gaddafi himself. They missed him, killed his 5-year-old daughter. And, of course, when Israel was attacking and trying to sink the USS Liberty, Israel was telling the U.S. government, oh, it's Egypt. Egypt's attacking your ship. You've got to go make war on Egypt. Same thing with the Levant affair. Israel was blowing up British and American assets in Egypt, planting evidence to frame the Egyptian Muslims and say, you've got to go make war on Egypt. This is what Israel does. And we know that Israel and all of its minions in the United States Congress are trying to somehow derail this peace agreement, the P5+1, and get that war with Iran going that they have been lusting after ever since the end of last century, the Project for the New American Century. General Wesley Clark blew the whistle. Iran was on that list of nations to be conquered by the United States to make sure their oil was only traded for U.S. dollars, to impose a private central bank on them, and basically to pay them back for kicking out their U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah, back in 1979. All righty, we're going to grab a phone call here real quick. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I've just been reading IRNA. That's the semi-official Iranian news agency. According to them, their ships are actually in port now. It's one helicopter carrying ship, one destroyer, and the rest are cargo ships.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Carrying aid supplies to Yemen.
Would you send me that link?
I will, yes, as soon as we finish this discussion, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the next thing I want to look at is the situation. According to some reports I've read, the Houthis now, since capturing that military base, are well supplied with certain weapons, including air defense weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's why the Saudis have now stopped the bombing.
That would be a good reason for them to back off.
Yeah. So we're looking at a situation now which, again, is falling apart, just like the riots and violence in Maidan Square, Ukraine. It achieved one objective but failed in the rest. Now it looks like the Saudi bombing campaign on Yemen is doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, well, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. Ukraine's been plunged into chaos by the U.S. coup d'etat. Iraq is in chaos with this third invasion. Libya is in chaos. The U.S. having to go back in there a second time, and now they're going to do it to Yemen. Because America is great. We're the greatest nation on earth because we can kill more people than anybody else. And we're gosh darn good at it. That seems to be the thinking.
Unfortunately, the most of the people you kill are women and children.
Well, there's too many of those women and children anyway. It really is a very brutal attitude coming out of our government, and I don't know if it's just because these are the kind of people who are attracted to positions of power, all those prescription antidepressants they're on, or some of the water in some of the older parts of the city still going through lead pipes or something. I don't know what's going on, but these are clearly certifiably psychotic people that are in charge of this situation, and unfortunately they've got the keys to the nuclear weapons. John, we've hit a commercial break. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at Fox News, and everybody's agenda's all over the place. I mean, there's no thread of continuity left in our government here. The Democrats are out there saying that illegal immigrants need taxpayer tuition. The GOP is still out there. We've got to bomb whoever. Instead of having an election next year, let's take all the candidates running for the White House, put them in an arena with chainsaws. Whichever one comes out with most of their bodily parts intact, that's who the president's going to be. I think we might actually do a lot better than what we've been getting out of all these massively rigged corporate bought elections over the last several decades here. Up in Ukraine, massive demonstration in front of the U.S. Embassy against American interference in their country. These Ukrainians know exactly what the U.S. did start of last year and how it has basically crushed their country under not only military action, but skyrocketing debt to the European Central Bank, which nobody has any idea how Ukraine's ever going to pay it off. Ukraine is going to basically go the way of Greece somewhere down the road. But remember, those Ukrainians, they only hate us for our freedoms. They only hate us because we've got Disneyland and MTV and Miley Cyrus on a wrecking ball. Don't you ever dare think that all these nations around the world hate the United States of America because the U.S. government has a long history of going in and messing around with their governments, their nation here. Latest numbers coming out of Iraq is U.S. actions in Iraq to date have killed over 1 million people. Total deaths in all these U.S. wars are now well over 2 million. We're getting into World War death statistics at this point. Now, Moscow continues to defend the completion of its sales contract to Iran for the S-300 missiles, although they're actually going to be getting the S-400, because while Russia put the sale on hold to placate the U.S. government, the S-300 stopped being manufactured. So Iran's actually getting a better product for their money. And basically Moscow is saying, look, this is an air defense missile. It's not an offensive weapon. And if Iran has the S-300, S-400, it's going to make other nations, meaning the U.S. and Israel, think twice about trying to attack. Well, that logic does not seem to have really percolated quite through to Tel Aviv yet, because Israel's government has come out with a statement saying that they have a right to target those Russian missile systems as soon as they're deployed, that Israel's going to go in there and actually try and bomb a system designed to shoot down attacking Israeli aircraft. So go ahead, Israel. Try and bomb those things here. Have fun. That'll be fun to watch. Meanwhile, in light of Netanyahu's having suffered a huge amount of hoof and mouth disease before the United States Congress and basically strained, if not broken, his relationship with Barack Obama, the United Kingdom and France are calling for the United Nations Security Council to mandate resumption of some kind of a peace agreement between Israel and Palestine, at the end of which, if successful, Palestine will recognize Israel's right to exist as long as Israel recognizes Palestine's right to exist. The reason peace is impossible is because Israel maintains a position that everybody's got to recognize their right to exist, but they're under no obligation to recognize anybody else's right to exist. That's been the sticking point for over 60 years. New Zealand is actually drafting the issue. And basically, the U.S. has sent a message diplomatically to Israel saying that they're reassessing the special relationship with Israel, meaning that Israel should not count on an automatic U.S. veto of a Security Council resolution. So if the U.S. Security Council passes this resolution, Israel basically is going to have one of two choices. They're going to defy the United Nations yet again, and Israel already holds the world record for defying the United Nations resolution. I don't know why they don't kick Israel out at this point. Or they'll say, oh yes, we're going to go back to the peace talks, and they'll go back to the same old game of you give us everything we want now, and maybe a year or two down the road, we might do something nice for you, which has been how Israel has evaded making any progress whatsoever, because Israel does not want peace with Palestine. Israel wants Palestine. And that was underscored by a video which is on the web, and we put it on whatreallyhappened.com. There was a huge protest march through occupied East Jerusalem by Israelis chanting, death to the Arabs, death to the Arabs, death to the Arabs, death to the Arabs. And the Israeli police basically said all the Palestinians are ordered to stay in their homes to avoid trouble. Now, this has not been reported a great deal on the American corporate media, but could you imagine how the U.S. corporate media would react if it had been a crowd of Palestinians marching through those exact same streets shouting death to Jews? Headline coverage from one end of this country to another, from sunrise to sunset. Because it's offensive when the Palestinians say death to Jews, but it's okay for the Israelis to say death to Arabs. That's just, they're just nice people expressing their First Amendment right to freedom of speech here. Kind of a surprising situation. We've sort of been given this image that Saudi Arabia and Israel are adversaries, and yet not only is Israel sending their warplanes to fly alongside Saudi Arabia to whoop on those poor people of Yemen, Saudi Arabia just gave Israel $16 billion. So the alliances are definitely changing, and I'm sure from Saudi Arabia's point of view that they're perfectly willing for Israel to start a war with Iran that Americans will die in, because Iran is a regional economic and political rival to Saudi Arabia as well as to Israel. Now, turning to the economy, the European Central Bank is telling Greece, we're running out of time. You must do something. And Greece is basically saying the same thing they've always been saying. You have got to modify the debt and the debt payments and the interest, and you've got to write off the odious debt, because that's what the new government of Greece campaigned on. The ECB is taking a hard line because they can't cut Greece any slack, or the rest of the member nations of the European Union will start demanding exactly the same. So the government of Greece is in a last-ditch act of desperation mode. They're engaged in confiscation of surplus public funds, any that they can find. And I think they're just forestalling the inevitable. Greece is going to default. It's going to trigger a derivatives firestorm. Greece is going to leave the EU, and the EU is going to start shattering, because the other European Union nations that have gotten a raw deal from the European Central Bank are going to start saying, look, we're going to be better off by ourselves. This union didn't work out for us at all. It's great for the people at the top of the union. It's great for Brussels. They get to stand up there and say, look at the empire we have created out of other people's countries. Those countries want to go back to taking care of themselves for their own nation and their own people, and that's a perfectly reasonable thing for them to want to do. Whether it is Italy, France, Spain, Catalonia, Yemen, Eastern Ukraine, Libya, Iraq, they just want to run their own country for their own citizens and their own benefit, not be part of some gigantic new world order which is being brought into being for no other reason than greed and ego. Now, we've been talking about all of these new trade partnerships that are trying to cement the current economy in place before it deteriorates any further. And it includes giveaways to media organizations. It alters copyright law to take away things like fair use. It prohibits GMO labeling in all member countries. And now we're getting word that the Transatlantic Pacific Investment Partnership, Trade and Investment Partnership, may be extended to Israel to give Israel all of this favorable access to these other countries there to try and offset some of the boycott and divestment and sanctions. What should be alarming to most people is the intense secrecy around both the transatlantic and trans-Pacific trade agreements. And if they're keeping it that secret and they're trying to fast-track it, it means what's in there is great for the corporations, great for the politicians who get donations from those corporations, and bad for pretty much everybody else. Meanwhile, up in Detroit, they're now in the Guinness Book of World Records. They've had the single largest tax foreclosure in American history. As many as 100,000 people all lost their homes in a single day. 100,000. Median income in the United States has fallen 40%. 3/4 of Americans are living from paycheck to paycheck to paycheck. And then they're wondering why we're not stimulating the economy by spending more money at the shopping malls. We don't have it. We'll be back after the news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. And sorting through all the stuff that's going on here. Now, back to the economy. Everyone's talking about taxation. Who pays more, who pays less, and that's kind of a distraction. In my opinion, everybody is taxed too much. Rich, poor, middle class. The government that doesn't know how to control its own spending impulses. And no matter how much they tax from us, they still go deeper into debt to that private central bank. But there is an article over here from Investment Watch blog. If states and cities taxed the rich at the same rate as the middle class, they'd have an additional $200 billion a year in additional funding. And we know that most of these states and cities that are in bankruptcy or at the edge of bankruptcy are in those positions for far less than $200 billion. So we're literally bankrupting our country, our cities, our states, to keep the rich money junkies happy. Now, McDonald's earnings continue to go down. Their revenue falls 11% in this last quarter as consumers continue to reject garbage. That's part of it. People want to eat healthy. It's already been declared a mental illness, orthorexia nervosa. If you want to eat healthy food, you're mentally ill. Sane people love their chemically laden GMO Soylent Brown sandwich. But what's also going on here is that McDonald's built its reputation as an affordable place to get a meal. And a couple of years back, McDonald's decided they wanted to reposition themselves and move upscale with McCafe and nicer interiors, and they wanted to attract a more affluent audience, which generally doesn't go to fast food restaurants to begin with. And inevitably, as a result, McDonald's prices for their food began to rise to the point where they're on a par with other restaurants. And I think that was their big strategic mistake. They didn't stay with what was working for them. Radio Shack made exactly the same mistake. They built a business and then they abandoned their existing customer base with dreams of glory by going out and hitting the consumer market. And I miss Radio Shack. Even though in later years its parts and equipment began to deteriorate in many areas, not all of them. I got a multimeter from them just before they shut down their store here that is really very well made. But when you go into a business and you're doing well, most wisdom says stick with the knitting, stick with what you know, stick with what works. Don't abandon what you built in dreams of glory to moving elsewhere. For those of you who are into sexy lingerie, the very famous Fredericks of Hollywood has called it quits. And they're shutting all of their stores, and apparently they're going to file for bankruptcy as well. Now, surprisingly, Boeing is looking up. They just sold a 757 to an Iranian airline which says they're going to pick up a second one here, probably next month. So I guess Boeing is exempt from all these U.S. sanctions against Iran for wanting to kill Israel and build nuclear bombs and all the rest of it, because Boeing is selling product to Iran. Now, getting on to politics here, there's a very sort of funny, odd story going around here. This is reported in the Washington Post. The 13 words you can't write about Hillary Clinton anymore. And basically, this is a directive from the Clinton campaign to all of their supportive journalists, the ones who like Hillary, saying, you will not use these words to discuss her. We have people monitoring your writings online and in print. And if you use these words, you will not be on the list of gets a free ride on Air Force One after she wins. The words they are not allowed to use are polarizing, calculating, disingenuous, insincere, ambitious, inevitable, entitled, overconfident, secretive, will do anything to win, represent the past, and out of touch. I presume at this point that power mad, crazy bitch is still acceptable. And we will, of course, continue to use that here as well. Now, you remember last week when Hillary was doing her I'm Just Plain Folks tour through Iowa and Nebraska, and there was actually a picture of her flying coach, and she had her own luggage she was towing, although the suitcase was way too big to go in the overhead rack, so it was a staged shot. Well, apparently Hillary is realizing that, hey, that didn't play very well, nobody's being fooled, and so she's back to flying first class, and here's the story. She's up in New Hampshire trying to impress those people to support her, and she wants to fly back to Washington, D.C., which is not a very long flight. But she, in her little Scooby-Doo van, escorted by New Hampshire and Massachusetts police, made an 80-mile-per-hour dash from New Hampshire down to Boston so they could catch a flight that had first-class seats for Hillary. Didn't want to go to Manchester Airport, which was right there, because none of the flights from Manchester to Washington, D.C. had first-class seats, so let's just tear on down the turnpike. From New Hampshire to Massachusetts, 80 miles an hour, police escort, to make sure that Hillary gets her first-class seat for what is less than an hour's flight. Jeb Bush is out there praising Obama's expansion of NSA surveillance. Jeb Bush never met a wiretap or a spy cam he didn't like. And as we know, the original Patriot Act provisions are due to sunset in June, but they're already trying to find some way to keep the skullduggery going. And we have Senator McConnell has introduced legislation to extend authority relating to roving surveillance, access to business records, and so forth and so on. And he says this is all under the Foreign Intelligence Service Act of 1978. Now, the bill's not formally on the Senate calendar, but he's pushing it as hard as he can. They're all fans of the surveillance state. Now, setting aside for the moment that all of this is a violation of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, specifically the Fourth Amendment, you need to remember that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act does not really have jurisdiction inside the United States borders. That's why it's called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It was supposed to allow the U.S. to expand spying on foreign threats, foreign businesses, and it was never supposed to be applicable to here in the United States of America. Okay, now then, over in Great Britain, Lord Janner has been a staunch defender of the image of the British political establishment. I'm not Lord Janner, I'm sorry. This is an article over in Daily Mail, and it's a writer at the Daily Mail who up until recently has been a staunch supporter of the image of the political establishment in Britain. But he's saying after the recent scandal involving Lord Janner, he's having to finally admit, as so many people in Britain are, the British government does in fact shamelessly twist justice to protect its own from scandal. There's been an overwhelming exposure of all these sexual predators, child molestation. I still don't understand what it is that drives them, but apparently it's part of the pathology of people who seek political power, that they want to diddle the little kiddies, whether it's political power in government or political power in the church, or who knows where all else. And I think most of us need to understand that government really isn't a bunch of superior people. It's really just that high school clique, the socias, the rich kids who would look out for each other and just get away with whatever they wanted to do. It's those same people grown up with more money and, unfortunately, weapons of war to play with. And we had the same scandal going on here in the United States. And the Franklin scandal went all the way up to the White House. And Congress and politicians pulled together to make sure the American people never found out about that, because governments, as a category of people, with precious few exceptions, are a bunch of really sick people. The curse of political power is it attracts the very sort of people who should never, ever be allowed to have it. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we've got some late breaking, developing stories here. Now, back when Obama started talking to Cuba about ending this ridiculous embargo the U.S. has maintained against Cuba ever since the Cuban people kicked out their U.S. puppet ruler, Batista, I speculated that one reason why the U.S. was all of a sudden softening its stance with Cuba was to prevent Russia from regaining a foothold in the Caribbean as the U.S. proceeds to try and start a war with Russia. And then we found out that Raul Castro went to Moscow for V-Day parade and to meet with Vladimir Putin, and I suggested that maybe the U.S. change in policy toward Cuba was too little too late. And now we're hearing that Russia and Cuba are on negotiations to placing a GLONASS signal calibration station in Cuba. Now, a few years ago, when it came out that the United States was deliberately inducing errors into the GPS system, a lot of other countries got very worried. Too much of their commerce, airline flights, cargo shipping, whatever, was dependent on the U.S.-based GPS system, and they said, we've got to have an alternative. So just like BRICS set up a parallel banking system to SWIFT, Russia deployed their own navigational satellite system called GLONASS, and its accuracy in our hemisphere has been degraded from not having what are called calibration stations over here. And they're now going to solve the problem by having this station in Cuba. And it's a minor issue, but apparently Cuba and Russia have also agreed on deliveries of modern Russian aircraft to the Cuban airlines. So this little, we're going to be nice to Cuba long enough to keep Russia out of here, does not appear to have worked out very well. Pardon me. Up in France, President Francois Hollande has now acknowledged that if the contract they have with Russia for the delivery of these Mistral helicopter carrier ships is terminated under pressure from the United States of America, France will refund Russia's money, plus under the contract they do have to pay a sizable cancellation fee. I have a feeling France has been told they will not have to pay for this themselves. The American taxpayer, as usual, covers the cost of these miscalculations. But France is already paying another price for having acceded to the U.S. demand to not send these ships to Russia, because other nations that have been buying weapons from France are now canceling their contracts, or they're not renewing contracts, or they're simply turning down offers of contracts and going to other providers. In fact, France just lost a major warplane contract to another nation that went to Russia and said, we're going to buy your fighters. They're just as good, they're not as expensive, and we know you will deliver what you promise. We don't have that guarantee with France. We know that France will cancel, they'll take our money and they'll cancel the contract if the U.S. government tells them to do it. So, now then, let's see. Here's a bizarre story. Obama calls on Iran to help resolve the crisis in Yemen, like it's somehow all Iran's fault. And that's something they've been trying to say. Oh, Iran is behind all the bad things that are going on. It's not our fault. It's not our fault for, staging a coup d'etat and kicking out the legitimate governments and putting in a puppet. That always worked before. If it's not working today, it must be the fault of Iran. So Obama's out there saying that Iran's got to help resolve the crisis in Yemen, and I'm sure I know exactly what Iran's going to call up and do. let the legitimate government back into power in Yemen, in Libya, in Iraq, in wherever. And all these problems will go away. Alrighty, let's see. Now, we are learning an awful lot about the inner workings of the Sony Entertainment Corporation from the hack into their computers a while back, which was being blamed on China and Iran and Russia. But as of last report from actual computer security experts, this was an internal leak by a disgruntled employee. Apparently management slapped around somebody in a way they found unacceptable, and they dumped all of these emails onto a server, and WikiLeaks has them. People are going through it. They are learning a lot about the entertainment industry in Hollywood that we've known here in the independent media for a long time. I certainly knew working back in the industry many years ago. Now the American people are knowing about it. The close, ongoing relationship between Sony management and the government of Israel, as one example. And now we're getting an interesting story here where Sony executives met with British Prime Minister David Cameron shortly before the Scottish independence referendum in order to delay the release of the TV series The Outlander, which is about 18th century life in Scotland under British rule. And like Braveheart, it does not portray the British Empire in the best possible light. And so David Cameron prevailed on Sony Pictures to delay the release of that TV series in Britain, and Sony agreed. Now, yesterday we were going back and forth about what's really going on with this Iranian convoy and what's really there and what are they really doing. And talk about the USS Theodore Roosevelt, was it threatened by Iranian mini-submarines, and had there been some kind of an embarrassment like the Donald Cook. So I went back and I hunted this down. And basically it goes back to a series of war games that were carried out in the South Atlantic near Florida. And there was a French submarine, the Saphir, which for the first part of the war games was part of the good guys' force, and then for the second part of the war games was broken off into the OPFOR, the opposing force, and simply told, get inside the Theodore Roosevelt screen and sink as many ships as you can. And the Saphir, all by itself, succeeded in doing so. It got past the multi-billion-dollar defensive screen. The Aegis ships, there's Perry-class, Bruins-class, whatever they've got out there is the sub-hunters. The United States Navy's anti-submarine warfare assets failed to detect the Saphir coming in, and at the end of the day, the Saphir sunk the Theodore Roosevelt itself and most of its escorts. This was briefly announced on the military websites in both France and the United States, and then immediately deleted. Now, over at WhatReallyHappened.com, we put up a short video documentary, the F-35, the jet that ate the Pentagon. And it basically goes into how this whole weapons development program was set up to just generate massive profits without, and commit the country and the taxpayer to seeing it all the way through without knowing for a fact they were going to get a usable weapons platform at the end of it. And it's only 8 minutes long, and it just really lays it out. Now, a reader informed me that the movie The Pentagon Wars that I talked about yesterday was up on YouTube in its entirety. Probably won't stay there, but we did link it to WhatReallyHappened.com so you have a chance to look at it. It's a very funny movie based on the true story of the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. We'll be back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, yesterday I was talking about all the Hillary scandals that are coming out. New book coming out talking about foreign contributions to the Clinton Foundation that coincide with changes in U.S. foreign policy while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. And a lot of people are saying, oh, this could really be the end. And I speculated what's going on is the Hillary campaign strategy is to dump all the scandals out there now so that next year when anybody talks about them, they can say, oh, that's old news. We already dealt with it. It's long ago. You know, stop living in the past, blah, blah, blah. And we're seeing something that looks like more of the same because Hillary Clinton's lawyer, after months and months and months of delay regarding Benghazi, Hillary Clinton's lawyer is now pressing the head of the House panel investigating Benghazi to schedule her testimony right now. David Kendall, we've heard that name before, is Clinton's lawyer, saying there's no reason to delay anymore or have her testify in private. Let's just get it out there and get it on record. And, of course, we know she will not say anything damaging to her self-image. And the whole idea will be that next year, during the campaign, what about Benghazi? Oh, she already testified. It's old news. Please stop talking about all these old ancient things. Well, Madam Hillary, we're going to be spending all next year talking about all those old scandals, because what your hair looks like and what dress you're wearing are not the issues in the election, but your past entire career in politics all the way back to the Rose Law Firm, cattle futures trade, travel office firings, Whitewater, Flowerwood, Castle Grande, Morgan Guarantee, the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, Vince Foster, and yes, Benghazi. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. John in Illinois, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, Mike, what difference does it make?
Every bit in the world.
You got that right.
Okay, and I'll be honest, when it comes to the Clintons, yeah, it's personal for me.
Yeah, it is. That's a fascinating marker for your career. I mean, personally, for your life to take that direction, that you got so wrapped up in that Vince Foster thing, and it really did change your life. I mean, that's what's happening to everybody. Something political event is happening, and people are taking action in their own way. So, we're doing the best we can.
Yep.
I wasn't gonna send you the link, but I was gonna encourage the listeners to go and watch the last episode of RT's Crosstalk. Do you watch that with Peter Lavelle?
I do from time to time. I'm not a regular viewer, but what's going on with the current episode?
Well, he did a whole thing on the Yemenis crisis and how the United States and the United States and Saudi Arabia make absolutely no sense what they're doing. And towards the end of the program, the last 5 minutes, it was just filled with facts. 26 million people live in Yemen. The people of Yemen, they don't support the rebels necessarily. They're really caught in the middle. They don't support they're not supporting the Saudi airstrikes, thinking that they're going to get democracy. I think they were saying the last guy, our last U.S. puppet that we have in there, that guy's a big Muslim theocrat. He wasn't going to deliver that nation into anything anyway. But they really and then 90% of their food, 90% of the food that comes to Yemen does come from Iran. So what we're doing out there, the blockade, is a blockade of food, and that's going to really...
And that's a war crime. That's a crime against humanity. Collective punishment, enforced starvation. I mean, these are all war crimes. And I'm rather surprised that Russia Today doesn't understand what's going on here. The U.S., using Saudi Arabia as a proxy, is simply slapping down one of their conquered provinces that tried to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler. This is a continuing pattern. We saw it in Cuba. We saw it in Chile. We saw it in the Philippines. We're seeing it in Iran, Iraq, Libya, now Yemen.
And what came out in the program was basically, this is a U.S. proxy war against Iran, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to show the Saudis that we support them in what they're doing, and these guys were saying this is going to be Saudi Arabia's Vietnam.
Yes, a lot of people are saying that. And I would question this idea whether the people of Yemen are supporting the Houthis or the rebels, because those are niche descriptions for what is really going on. The reason it's taking this much effort is the U.S., through Saudi Arabia, is basically at war with all of Yemen over who's going to be running that country and for whose purpose.
Well, and again, the whole thing with and the real black eye to the neocon agenda. I mean, on the one hand, obviously, Obama's a hypocrite, Mr. Nobel Peace Prize winner. He's created all this quote-unquote jihadi wonderland all over the Middle East. But the real hypocrisy is this United States, doesn't matter what party, you are supporting Sunni dictatorships. You are supporting Sunni monarchs. You are supporting brutal Sunni dictatorships. And that's what they're supposedly against. But that's exactly what our policy is supporting. And it's really pathetic, and it doesn't make any sense, and the American people better put their brain cells together and go, none of these candidates that support what's going on in the Middle East, because it's like you said, they don't want any of these countries to be in charge of their own oil, natural resources, be independent. They don't want the Christians living in peace with the Jews they just don't want it. They want to conquer all these people. It's ridiculous.
That's exactly right. I mean, the United States right now is running like the old Roman Empire did, where there's the central government and land, and then all of the provinces are under the control of Rome, but still were allowed to call themselves by their own name, Germania, Britannia, whatever, and sort of act semi-autonomous, but they were firmly under the control of Rome. And the United States has been playing the same game, especially since the end of World War II, where we're all told that these are all independent countries, but they're not. Their governments are not working for the nation and the people. They're working here for the United States of America. And, of course, above that, we've got one more level where our Congress, our federal government, is openly serving a foreign power, Israel. And we see the effects of that in our decaying infrastructure and our decaying economy, the constant looting of our wealth to give to that imperial power. And we don't like it when our government is working for Israel, so why should Yemen like it when their government's working for the United States?
And one thing that's going to look even worse is the whole thing with the secret 28 pages about 9/11.
Yeah.
I don't think at this point, if we're trying to look like we're supporting Saudi Arabia, we're not going to look good if we try to pull this. Oh, the 28 pages revealed. Now it proves Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11.
Well, first of all, it's come out that the actual original 28 pages mention Israel, not Saudi Arabia. The people who are out there wagging that around were working with their own altered copy. And you need to understand that there are factions within these various governments trying to get their own agenda. And there are certainly people in the United States who would like to see a war with Saudi Arabia, first of all, so that the U.S. government has an excuse to simply erase the debt that is owed to Saudi Arabia, bring Saudi Arabia's oil under control of American companies, and everybody's playing everybody against everybody. It's like after the end of World War I and the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. Control over the Middle East depended on keeping these nations at war with each other constantly.
Well, and something that's interesting, too, is what the people, if we look at this economically, we're finding out that these Middle Eastern countries, just like China, these people are capitalists. They sell their natural resources, their products, whatever they do, they sell it for money, and they make a profit. And, Chinese, they might be communist politically, but economically, they're capitalists,
Yeah.
And the people, pretty soon, the people are going to start, wanting higher wages, but they'll keep it under wraps, but I mean, if Saudi Arabia or these other oil-rich countries are, brutal theocracies or whatever they are, they understand what money is. We sell oil, we make money. I mean,
Yeah, it's always been that way. John, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, and we will be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're coming up here on the top of the hour. I'm looking at the corporate media feed, and they're running another story about this recent poll that showed a majority of Americans support gun rights, and only a minority are supporting the gun grabber agenda. And, of course, the corporate media's attitude is, how can they even think about that? What's wrong with these people that they want the Second Amendment? Don't they trust the police to take care of them? Guns are bad. Which is why our government is giving guns to the Sinaloa drug cartel through Operation Fast and Furious. But looking at the story, I remembered that story that we talked about yesterday, where there was an attempted mass shooting in Chicago. Guy walked into this public space and just opened fire. And it was stopped by a taxi driver with a concealed carry permit who put the shooter on the ground. Have you ever noticed that any time public opinion starts to go against the gun grabbers, there's immediate mass shooting? Columbine happened just as the state was about to loosen up their gun laws and allow more concealed carry. Go back and take a look. Every one of these mass shootings always happens just in time to thwart the reemergence of gun rights and gun ownership. And it looked like they were going to do that in Chicago yesterday, and they still may try again. Because they want to get the guns away from you here. Now, all this talk about Iranian warships taking weapons to Yemen and all the rest of the saber-rattling does not seem to be having an effect on moving forward with the P5+1. I just put up an article at whatreallyhappened.com from TASS saying that the provisions of the final document on Iran's nuclear program has been coordinated. They're going to be having meetings in New York and then back to Vienna. They're saying it's all on track. They're going to make this thing happen. Unless somebody drops a nuclear bomb on the United States and says, see, it was Iran. We told you they had nuclear weapons. You have to go kill them. Now, this story kind of bothers me that we're going to be talking about, and I want to preface it by walking down the path of nostalgia to when I was a young man, back during the last Great Ice Age, and I liked to tinker on cars, and I was sort of the family mechanic. I work on my brother's Fiat, on my mother's Ford. I had a Volkswagen and then later a Datsun, and I was fairly decent. I could even, I could do a short block. Today, of course, cars are much more complicated, and alarmingly, automakers are trying to get laws to say that it is illegal for you to work on your own car. Now, the computer systems inside the cars are already protected by the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. You're not allowed to go in there and look at the code and find out where the NSA is tracking you, because it's copyrighted material and you're not allowed to look at that. Now there is a push to basically say that you are not allowed to work on your own car anyway, because it'll stimulate the economy for you to go down to the garage and have a licensed, bonded, authorized mechanic change your spark plugs or fan belt or the rest of it. And the justification is that modern cars are too complex for home mechanics. We shouldn't even allow them to try. The day of the gearhead is over. And even John Deere, which I know from my childhood in New England farming country, agricultural machinery, even John Deere is getting on board this idea that you don't really buy your car or tractor or truck. You are merely licensing it from the automobile company. They're taking a bad lesson from the software company. You don't actually own that software. It's merely licensed, and you have to do what we tell you to do with it. And now they want to do that with cars and farm equipment. Now, personally, I don't want to own a car that is so complicated I can't work on it. You certainly don't want vehicles that complicated in a war zone, do you? Referencing that phone call that we got yesterday. There's a clear market need for a simple and reliable, elegant car that owners can maintain and repair themselves. No bells and whistles. Engine, powertrain, brakes, steering, body, all of it put together with the same size nuts and bolts so that people can basically go out and fix the thing if they need to, especially if they're out in the middle of the Arizona desert, in the middle of a sandstorm, which I've been through, by the way. And here's a more important situation. If we get this law saying that owners of cars cannot tinker on their own cars, where will we get tomorrow's car designers and engineers? Because if you go back and you look at the history of General Motors or Ford or Chevrolet, their star engineers and designers all began as kids, teenagers, tinkering on their own cars, learning their craft from the inside out. If they actually make it illegal for kids to work on their own cars, they're cutting the throat of our automotive industry for future generations. It doesn't get more harebrained than that out there. Now, as we mentioned in that phone call earlier, there's a video out of a U.S. Marshal destroying a woman's camera. This is out in California. This woman was videotaping an arrest, minding her own business. She was a distance away from the police. All of a sudden, police officer turns around carrying a rifle, charges her, grabs the phone, slams it onto the pavement, turns around and walks away. A second camcorder cell phone caught it, went viral on the net. Now, federal authorities are saying that they are investigating exactly what happened. We can see what happened. It's these cell phone cameras that are the great equalizer in our society. And the more that are out there, the better. Remember that shooting in South Carolina? Shot the guy several times in the back. Official story, oh, he grabbed my taser. I feared for my life. They're coming right for us. And they shot the guy. And the police officer and all his buddies said that's the official story. The corporate media echoed that story. And then 3 days later, the video of the incident surfaced. And it showed the officers just shooting this guy in the back and then planting the taser on him. And as Richard Nixon used to say, it's not the crime that gets you. It is that cover-up. Now, a while back down in Georgia, there was this tragic incident where the SWAT team kicked down a door of a home, and before they kicked down the door, they threw a flashbang grenade in through the window into the crib of a baby and permanently disfigured the child. The parents are now looking at $10 million in medical bills to save the baby's life and try and reconstruct his face. And at first, the Georgia authorities said, we're really sorry it happened and we'll help cover the medical costs. And then they turned around and said, no, this sort of thing happens in the course of police work. And, even though we didn't actually find anything there illegal in the house, we had the authority to kick down the door and flashbang the baby. Well, public pressure has continued to mount, and the county government in Georgia is now going to pay $1 million to the parents of that disfigured child. Not even begins to cover the hospital bills, but it's certainly better than nothing. But it just underscores how incredibly brutal the police are being encouraged to be. And I say encouraged because, remember, we talked yesterday about this. Unarmed teenager shot 16 times by the police and defended by their chief of police, saying that's what the police are trained to do. Now, as you know, all right, listen, we're coming up on the news break. I got a caller. I'm going to put the Baltimore situation into the next hour because we're going to need to talk about that a little bit more. Meanwhile, Jeff in Minnesota, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, I'm a first-time caller. Okay, about the deal with not being able to work on your car or access the actual innards of it, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, think about this. You'd like to go in and show some kids how to fix a car or repair something. A guy went in and tried to show kids at a school how to fix a common light switch or repair a cord, and because he brought a screwdriver, he carried a weapon into the school and was, could never go in there again.
Yeah. I mean, it's absurd. I think it's California was considering, they didn't pass it. California actually considered a law to make it illegal to buy a machete or a hatchet at the hardware store unless you were a gardener or groundskeeper licensed by the state of California. I mean, that's how incredibly over the top all of this legislation is getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've been watching your blog for a while, and I just started listening a few weeks ago, and yeah, it's pretty cool stuff.
No, thank you. I'm glad you like it. Please share it with all your friends and family and social media.
What island are you actually on?
What network? I'm on the Genesis Communication Network, and I'm sorry, but we're going to have to take a break for our news, and thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, there are protests taking place in the streets of Baltimore over the strange circumstances regarding the death of Freddie Gray. Black man was arrested, was caught on a cell phone video looking like he was perfect condition, handcuffed, put in the patrol car, driven off. The story is that for some reason, even though he was not seen to be violent, police stopped, put him in leg irons, and then physically threw him face down into the back of a different van. And somewhere in the process, his spinal cord was severed by 80%, and he subsequently died. 6 officers involved have been suspended, pending an investigation. The police department is still not releasing any information whatsoever as they try and get their story in order, but now the Department of Justice is saying they will investigate as well. And they should. Another story, anger at acquittal of Chicago policeman in shooting of woman. We talked about this yesterday. Officer shot Rekia Boyd, 22, and he has had his charges thrown out of court. And the reason for that is extraordinarily bogus. The prosecutors, rather than charge this police officer with outright murder, charged him with manslaughter. The judge declared that it was obvious that the officer, Dante Servin, intended to shoot Rekia Boyd. And manslaughter is what they charge you with when the death is accidental. And so he said, obviously, this officer is not guilty of manslaughter. He should have been charged on murder, but you didn't, so he's out. Walks away free under this legal wrangling. Now, here's a story from Great Britain, just so that you don't think it's just the American police that have gone off the deep end on their antidepressants and Israeli security training. And this really is out there. There was a single car accident, okay, during which a 20-year-old woman died. The police deputies, sheriff's deputies, undressed the body of the victim and took pictures, nude pictures of her body by the side of the road. And the mother is suing, as well as she should. This actually took place in Cook County, Illinois. It's not just inappropriate, it's downright sick. There's a car accident, the 20-year-old woman is dead, and the cops undress her to take pictures of her body. That's just a little bit out there. It was carried in the British papers, not much coverage of it here in the American corporate media. Article coming out of the Daily Bell basically laying it out. Police are imposing death sentences on the American people without a trial. It's like the movie Judge Dredd brought to life, where the cops are judge, jury, and executioner right there on the spot. It's really, really happening. And they're talking about this other story that took place where there was a guy named Harris on the pavement with police on top of him, totally subdued. Officer goes for what he thinks is his taser, grabs his gun by mistake, and shoots the guy. And on the video, you can say, oh, I shot him, I'm so sorry. Same thing happened at the San Francisco BART station. They just grabbed the thing, pulled the trigger without thinking. Right now, the police of the United States of America are murdering 55 times as many innocent Americans as terrorists are. Now, we pointed out that study up in Washington State that showed that because of the negative media attention, police are in fact hesitating before they pull the trigger on black suspects. Now, that's good, but the problem is they're not hesitating with white suspects. And right now, the numbers are very disturbing. The police are 25 times more likely to pull the trigger on a white suspect than a black one. And we're starting to see some coverage of white people being killed wrongfully by the police. But there's an article in the Washington Times that basically comes out and says the police are killing more white people than black people, but the minority deaths are generating more outrage, because they're being politically exploited by those whose political agenda involves creating a racial crisis that must be solved at huge taxpayer expense. So you get the Al Sharptons and everybody else down there saying, this is racism, this is racist. No, it isn't. It's police brutality by police officers of all colors against innocent Americans of all colors. Another very tragic story. Over in South Florida, family walks into a courthouse expecting to see their daughter appear for a hearing. Daughter doesn't show up. Family receives a phone call, not from the police, but from another inmate, informing them that their daughter had died in custody. This was covered on NBC Channel 6. Can you imagine? Your daughter is in custody, you're going to the court, there's going to be a hearing, and all of a sudden you get a phone call from another inmate in prison saying, just so you know, your daughter died. Now, right now, there is a large protest called the March to Justice. It's been marching across a significant part of the country. It's arrived in Washington, D.C. They marched from New York City to Washington, D.C. on foot. Apparently couldn't get a seat on Hillary's plane. They're planning a rally on the west lawn of the U.S. Capitol building. Or it happened yesterday. I'm looking at the date here. It may have happened yesterday. It may be for next week. But the issue is police brutality. It's not an issue of racism. They're trying to spin it that way. to make it a racial issue, because then the candidates next year can campaign on an issue of race back and forth. They really can't campaign on police brutality. Who's going to take the opposing point of view? I think police brutality is out of hand. Yeah, okay. They can't get a debate out of it. They can't get position statements. They can't make TV commercials about both sides of the argument. There isn't both sides of the argument. Police brutality is wrong. Now, the corporate media is out there trying to calm things down, and you're not going to believe their latest political spin. Their latest spin is, you shouldn't be upset about all these wrongful homicides at the hands of the police. It's actually been going on all along. There's just more coverage of it now, so you shouldn't be upset. Okay, if this degree of police murder of innocent Americans has been going on all along, why did you, the corporate media, not call attention to it? Isn't that your job, to keep the American people fully informed? And now that the independent media is covering the story, you're out there saying, well, we've known about it all along. It's no big deal. I don't think so. Getting on back to the issue of gun ownership, not surprisingly, the black segment of our society is starting to feel that they have a legitimate need to be armed, not against criminals, not against terrorists, but against wrongful acting police officers. And they're equating the efforts to grab the guns from inner city ghettos on the same level as the Nazis disarming the Jewish ghettos during World War II, in order to make it easier to just go on in and kill them whenever they want. And I'm absolutely in agreement with them. And I would remind everybody that the United States Supreme Court ruled in John Bad Elk versus United States that when the police themselves are acting outside the law and outside the Constitution, citizens have a legal right to resist up to and including the use of lethal force. Now, I don't want to see blood in the streets, but right now it looks like the police are drawing first blood. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we take this next phone call, I think this next story tells you exactly what's going on in this country. This story was over in ProLiberty.com, and it's reporting on a story that came out last December, that at one point, the Department of Homeland Security here in the United States seriously considered hiring the former head of the East German Stasi, Marcus Wolf, as Director of Homeland Security here in the United States of America. So just stop and think about that for a minute. The U.S. government wants to put the former head of the German Stasi in charge of Homeland Security here in the United States of America. That is, shall we say, quite revealing. Now, word did get out. There was an immediate backlash, and he never got that job. But the fact that they would even consider this guy as Director of Homeland Security tells you all that you really need to know about what's going on here. We're going to grab a phone call. Michelle in Florida. Aloha, Michelle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Michelle, are you there? Michelle, are you there? Okay, I am not hearing Michelle. I'm going to go ahead and put her back on hold. Now, over in Oregon, we were talking yesterday about how even though the Oregon miners had asked the militias, Oath Keepers, to stand down, that the local community was still supporting them. There is now a rally going on to support these miners against an unconstitutional land grab by the Bureau of Land Management. Now remember, the federal government and the Bureau of Land Management are in the wrong legally because of the enclave clause of the Constitution. The federal government is not allowed to own or control land other than what is under federal government buildings or infrastructure such as airports, military bases, and harbors. Now, it turns out the story that was put out on the independent media by two young Turks, among others, was a complete pile of USDA choice bovine excrement. In point of fact, the owners of the gold mine did not request the militias to stand down. That was made up and put out there on the independent media to trick the militias into turning around and going back home. Now, I know why the Bureau of Land Management wants these mines. These are the richest gold mines in the United States still operating. And we know how desperate the U.S. government, and in particular the Federal Reserve of New York, are to find another source of gold, to replace all that gold bullion that was deposited for safekeeping in the New York Federal Reserve and just isn't there any longer. Now, a little while ago, we had this story about how these TSA agents at a gate were sort of rigging the little system to sound an alarm to allow the TSA agents to go ahead and grope and fondle particularly attractive-looking passengers. And we have this story over in Natural News where a retired TSA officers come forward to say, this goes on all the time. Anytime they see somebody that's just really hot there in the line, they'll flip a switch or turn a dial to get a false alarm so they can take the person off for screening and run their hands all over their body. They think it's great fun and it's a perk of the job. This former TSA person goes on to say those new scanners they're using, the ones that they threw out there really quick when everybody was upset about being looked at naked, don't really work. Even the total nude scanners weren't working. Somebody figured out a way that if you just have something right on your hip, it's invisible against the background. So they took out these very expensive, really didn't work scanners, and they put in more expensive, still don't work scanners, all to sell you the illusion that you are somehow safe as long as you let the TSA fondle your daughters and your wives and sons and brothers, go through your luggage, steal your personal electronic devices, or at least copy off the memories of them, drop and wreck laptops, and so forth. And it's all a gigantic hoax. And everybody who created this security industrial complex, they're rich beyond dreams of avarice. And they're laughing at you. All right, real quick, we're going to see if Michelle came back. Michelle, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, so what's on your mind?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to see if you saw this article over in 12160. Where the New Jersey cop is on video saying that Obama just decimated the frickin' Constitution, so I don't give a damn. If he doesn't follow the Constitution, we don't have to.
Well, it validates Rivero's rule of the hierarchies. You know, any hierarchical structure inherits the manners and morals of the person at the top. And while I don't agree with the officer using that as an excuse to turn into a brutal, murdering thug, he is certainly right in his sociology. With Obama and, well, even, it's not just Obama. President Bush said the Constitution's just a blankety-blank piece of paper. And if you're seeing that attitude at the top, all of the subordinate agencies are going to say exactly the same thing. Hey, the Constitution's gone. Hallelujah, hallelujah, we're free at last. Don't have to pay attention. I'm sorry?
It's funny, though, because this cop didn't even, he knew that he was being videotaped and didn't even care.
Well, you know, he's wrong in one regard, okay? If the president is not complying with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, he's no longer legally the president, and Congress should remove him. And if you're a person of integrity, you're going to do what's right no matter what everybody else around you is doing. And if you're a police officer with integrity, you will still comply with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Or we're going to descend into anarchy. If you've got a government that refuses to play by the rules, that's the first step toward widespread anarchy.
Well, I don't know about anarchy. That basically just means without a ruler. So, I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing.
Well, you know, if you have a government that is not complying with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, they're illegal and illegitimate. And a lot of people could be forgiven for saying they're not a real government. They're just a bunch of criminals with uniforms and badges, and I have a right to stand my ground against their aggressions. And it will decay into anarchy. Anarchy could probably be better described as the absence of a recognized, acknowledged ruler structure, where the people say, yes, I agree, this is our ruler, this is our government. But more and more Americans are looking at what we have in Washington, D.C. as completely out of control, and yes, that's reflected in the treatment of the American people by the police officers. And if you don't have a government that people support and believe in, yeah, you're halfway to anarchy right there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Oh, I want to say one other thing, too, about the whole Israel situation.
Yeah.
I don't stand with Israel. I don't acknowledge Israel. Their government is just, as bad as our government is, if not worse. So I don't acknowledge them. I don't,
Well, I'm getting sick and tired of all these
so
supposed...
many people don't.
I'm getting sick and tired of American politicians who seem to put Israel ahead of this country. We got to let you go here, Michelle. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to close the phone lines for the rest of the show, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go ahead and get human-caused global warming out of the way on our program, not leave it till the last segment here, because we got a lot to talk about. Now, as you know, here in the Northern Hemisphere, we are finally, gratefully, into spring, even though there was still snow falling in parts of the country yesterday. Down below the equator, of course, they're in the inverse. They're going into their autumn, and already we are seeing signs of an early, brutal winter down under in Australia. And apparently they've had a cold snap in Brisbane and Queensland that is shattering previous records. Coldest April night in Brisbane for 3 years. Redcliffe, coldest night in 6 years. And let's see, Coolangatta on the Gold Coast, coldest April night in 16 years. Sunshine Coast, coldest April night in 20 years. Let's see, another one down in Maryborough. So it's going to be a brutal winter down there, and we will be documenting it. And this, of course, is to counter the Carbonazi propaganda that it was only really cold in New England and everybody else was roasty-toasty. And believe it or not, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration is still out there trying to claim that March of 2015 was the hottest March on record. Because they've got a chart and a graph and a computer model that says, oh, it was just incredibly warm here. And all of you people who thought you saw snow and ice, you're just hallucinating. Really. We have a pill for that. They're gonna declare doubting the theory of global warming as a mental illness. And you will have a pill for that, a pill that will make you believe whatever you're told by politicians. And by the way, there actually is an experimental drug that completely suspends doubt and skepticism. The used car salesmen are trying as hard as they can to get that legalized out there. Now, NASA scientist John L. Casey is out there saying it is time to face reality. The sun has gone into a new Maunder minimum. We are seeing the results of cooling across the globe. And he's saying by 2017, it's going to be really obvious that warming is the last thing we need to worry about. There are going to be serious disruptions. Now, today is Earth Day. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. Everybody's out there banging their agendas as loud as they can. Scott Walker is celebrating Earth Day by firing 57 of the state's Environmental Agency employees up there in Wisconsin. Another article we got over here at IntelliHub, imperative to abandon fossil fuels, called opportunity too good to be missed this Earth Day. We must do it now. Okay, great. You want to totally abandon fossil fuels. Okay, great. What are you going to put in its place? See, that's where this all breaks down. Now, a lot of these people supporting the desire to end the use of oil and gas are actually clandestine representatives of companies that are selling you alternatives. Windmills, solar cells, what have you, the electric vehicles. And I don't have a problem with those, but they don't exist in ample enough supply to simply write off oil and gas. And here's a hard reality you need to remember. We are a warrior culture. I don't like it, but we are. We're constantly waging war on other people, and war machines run on fossil fuels. Yes, the larger naval vessels can have nuclear reactors, but smaller naval vessels and aircraft, you can't run those on rubber bands or solar panels. That's just a reality. Maybe this push to abandon oil and gas is purely to reserve what remains of these resources for military use. And I agree there should be an alternative because there's only a finite amount of oil and gas down there. And yes, I understand that petroleum is actually produced by deep crust microbial activity. But in the last 100 years, we've used up a little more than half of what those microbes produced over the last billion years. They can't keep up with us. And I think we ought to be looking at alternatives, and we ought to make sure that all safety considerations for such projects are not placed in the hands of people with financial motives. Remember the lesson of Fukushima. All of these power stations have the safety features trimmed to save money to keep the stockholders happy, except one at Onagawa, where the chief design engineer waged a one-man campaign to say, we will keep the tsunami wall this high, because history has shown tsunamis this big. We will spend the money to put the emergency generators up on pedestals to keep them out of water. We will do all these things. And as a result, Onagawa was the only one of those Japanese power stations that was left untouched by the quake and tsunami. We need more people like this engineer in positions of power and authority to make these decisions. Now, the first Earth Day was back in 1970, made a big deal about it, and of course they came out with all these predictions that if we did not do what they were telling us to do, the world was going to come to an end. So, getting into our little Wayback Machine, we're going to go back to 1970, and these are some of the predictions they made back then. Quote, we have about 5 more years at the outside to do something, end quote. This is from Kenneth Watt, ecologist. Quote, civilization will end within 15 or 30 years unless immediate action is taken against problems facing mankind, end quote. That was from George Wald, Harvard biologist. Quote, population will inevitably and completely outstrip whatever small increases in food supplies we make. The death rate will increase until at least 100 to 200 million people per year will be starving to death during the next 10 years, end quote. Paul Ehrlich, Stanford University biologist. And again from Paul Ehrlich, by 1975, some experts feel that food shortages will have escalated the present level of world hunger and starvation into famines of unbelievable proportions. Other experts, more optimistic, think the ultimate food population collision will not occur until the decade of the 1980s. Now, Dennis Hayes, the chief organizer for Earth Day, went one step further. It is already too late to avoid mass starvation. And there's a bunch more of these listed under the article. So if all of these predictions were so botched, why should we listen to the predictions they're making today? It's driven by politics and economics. Now, that being said, I understand we're in a serious food population problem right now, not because the population has grown too large or that we're using too many fossil fuels, but because of reckless and stupid decisions by governments and corporations have wrecked large sections of the food chain. We're hearing about all these fisheries along the west coast of North America are having to basically shut down their harvests to try and rebuild depleted fish populations. The fish are not reproducing the way they used to. Could be Fukushima. Could be all these unmetabolized birth control pills being flushed into the ocean through the sewage systems. We're not exactly sure. We know that the Gulf oil disaster removed the Gulf of Mexico as a source of safe food for human consumption. We know that GMO is producing far less food than the natural varieties. And because of this, all this, we're the experts, we're in charge, reckless arrogance, we are in a situation where there really isn't enough safe and healthy food for the entire human population. And this is why governments have started turning a blind eye to the adding of fillers and other artificial chemicals to food from corporations. And the corporations, taking advantage of that license, are making more money by using the cheapest possible fillers and chemicals they can. And when you buy a product that says beef, that's not a description of what's in it. That's now a trade name for a beef-like substance that may or may not actually contain a piece of a cow. More when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today. We're talking about human-caused global warming and the carbon Nazis, and I am sensing the carbon Nazis are about ready to do another paradigm shift. Now, you will remember that back in 2000, the carbon Nazis were out there screaming that because of human-caused global warming, snowfalls were a thing of the past. Obviously, they couldn't stick with that, so they did a paradigm shift to the present where global warming is causing snow and ice. And that's kind of not getting a lot of traction because people realize the absurdity of that proposition. And so now they look like they're going to drop this whole warming, cooling, snow and ice thing completely, because the new issue coming from the carbon Nazis is seafloor ocean acidification. Your use of oil and gas, your wasteful lifestyle, is causing the floor of the ocean to become much more acidic, and this has been determined by testing the seafloor underneath the Antarctic ice shelf, which they're doing it down there so that some chemistry student can't run down to the nearest beach with a titration setup and check the pH for himself. Remember, that's the dodge, where it's detecting this way off in the far corners of the world where you can't go and check for yourself. They're going to drop all this. Snowfalls are a thing of the past because of the huge embarrassment, and they're going to talk about ocean pH because they know you can't actually see that or not with your own senses. So they're going to feel a little bit safe. But even this claim, which is going to be blamed on human activity to try and bring about the carbon tax, it's already in trouble, because nobody knows how many active volcanoes and thermal vents there are on the floor of the world's oceans, pouring out not only heat, but acidic chemicals. Then you have acidic runoff from soil. Remember, over time, the ocean gets saltier and saltier, and more acidic through a very simple mechanism unconnected to human activity. Rain falls on the land, it leaches out salts and low pH chemicals, they flow down the rivers into the ocean, and then the water evaporates, leaving the salts and minerals behind, goes back up in the sky and falls again as rain. Over time, the oceans continue to get saltier, and it's absolutely natural for it to do. In fact, looking at the rate of salinification of the world's oceans, you compare the saltiness of our blood, which is the same salts, with the salt water, and you actually can get a measure of how far ago on the evolutionary process our ancestors left the ocean. Because once we left the ocean, our blood didn't need to get any saltier. It kept the salt balance that was in the world's ocean when our ancestors crawled out onto the beach. So this idea that the ocean is getting more acidic could very easily be a part of nature, but they're going to take something that's happening naturally, unequivocally declare it that it's all your fault, and you are a sinner, you are a threat to planet Earth, and you will atone by turning over your money and allowing some government bureaucrat to decide how you will live your life. That's what's really going on here. And of course, everybody buying and selling carbon credits are going to make a bunch of money. Al Gore was broke when he ended his political campaign against George Bush, and then he hopped on this global warming bandwagon, and he's insanely rich again. He's made a huge amount of money bamboozling people about the world is getting warmer. It's all your fault, and you can save the planet by buying and selling carbon credits. Nature's a lot more powerful than that. Nature is unfazed by tiny increases in carbon dioxide. For one thing, it's already been proven repeatedly that the increase in carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is leading to a greener planet. Areas on the border of deserts are starting to go back to being green. Plants are growing bigger and faster and producing more food. And in a planet beset by famine, that's actually a good thing. Remember, during the Roman and medieval warm periods, and we're not talking CO2, we're talking about solar output going up, food was so plentiful that the Romans and the people of the Renaissance had lots of time left over for things like art and engineering and culture and architecture. The great flowering of civilization has always been during times of increased global temperature. And it's not up to us. Earth's climate is controlled by solar output, which is now at a 100-year low and appears to be going lower, and the slowly oscillating shape of Earth's orbit, which goes from circular to more elliptical and back. And when the orbit is more elliptical, Earth spends more time away from the sun, following Kepler's laws of orbital motion, and we get the ice ages. And when the orbit becomes more circular, we get the interglacials, which is where we are right now. And until Al Gore and his minions can control the output of the sun or change the shape of Earth's orbit, there isn't a thing they can do to stop climate from changing. They are as powerless against nature as Caligula was when he had his soldiers flog the ocean as a challenge to Neptune for daring to raise the tide when he did not want it to be raised. All righty, a couple of quick vaccine stories before we shut down here. Over let's see, this is being reported in Blacklisted News. Victims of the swine flu vaccine that suffered brain damage have won a $63 million lawsuit against GlaxoSmithKline. And this brings the total damages to something over $9.1 billion since 2003. And this is over pandemics, which was mandated, forced onto the public during the swine flu pandemic of 2009, which was pretty much fake. It turned out to be milder than the seasonal flu, and the World Health Organization acknowledged they lowered the number of infections necessary to declare it a pandemic in order to do so and put it in the media. You've got to go get Tamiflu and pandemics. And they damaged these people. And Tamiflu turned out to be no more effective against flu than ordinary over-the-counter acetaminophen. It was all about the money. And this stuff permanently damaged these people. That's okay. We're going to give them a whole bunch of money. They'll get $1 million each. That should keep them happy. That's the attitude of the big pharmaceutical industries. Now, over in California, there's been a lot of skullduggery about Senate Bill 277, which will mandate vaccinations for all Californians. You're not allowed to opt out. And apparently these people in the California government are not paying attention to all these people who were damaged, brain damaged by pandemics, or the rest of it, because they're out there. Now, a week ago, they had a hearing that was flooded with citizens saying, do not pass this. I demand the right to decide for myself what chemicals are pumped into my arm. And rather than have a vote when it looked like it was going to lose, they put the vote on hold, and it was caught on video. The guy running this committee turns to the industry lobbyists and says, what do you want to do? Which tells you who's really in control of this. Now, the bad news is Senate Bill 277 just passed Senate committee votes. What they did is this time they had a meeting for a vote only, no hearing, no public allowed. So nobody knows who voted yes, but apparently most of them did. So it's moving forward to sell your children's lives to the vaccine companies. They're doing the same thing down in Australia. Australia is passing a law saying that if you receive any government assistance, your children must be vaccinated. The ringer there is that under Australia's system, pretty much every family is getting some kind of an Australian government check. It's all about pumping the chemicals in there. And we don't know what chemicals are in there. Remember what turned out to be in those typhus vaccinations over in Kenya? Sterilizing chemicals, rendering the women who got these shots unable to bear children. So how do we know what's in these vaccines we're being told we must inject into our children? We don't. We absolutely don't. We're just supposed to trust government, that they know what's best for us. And don't forget, right now, nobody in the United States has died of measles in 10 years. But the measles vaccine has killed over 100. And by the way, they've come up with a new study to claim that there's no link between MMR vaccine and autism. Needless to say, this study was paid for by a health insurance company that doesn't want to have to pay claims for autism based on damaged vaccines. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get some animation work done, pay a few bills. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe. Stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Please share Genesis Communication and WhatReallyHappened.com on all your social media. We need to build our audience and bring this insanity to a halt. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.